My name is Clara Hayes. I am 35 years old, and last month, I was sworn in as the youngest ever federal judge for the District of Oregon. The path that led me to the ninth floor of the Mark O. Hatfield Courthouse in downtown Portland was paved with a quiet, relentless determination, built brick by brick in the long shadow of my older sister, Sophia. For most of my life, her radiance was the sun around which my family orbited, while I was a distant, dimly lit moon, noticed only when I passed through her light. I dedicated my life to the pursuit of justice, a concept I first came to appreciate through its conspicuous absence in my own childhood. I never imagined that my life's work and my family's deepest wounds would one day collide in my own courtroom, a place of order and law, where Sophia would finally tell me to my face what her every action had long implied, that I was a nobody. But sometimes, it is in the face of our deepest hurts that we find our truest strength, and in the most public of reckonings, we discover the quiet, unshakable truth of our own worth. Growing up in the Laurelhurst neighborhood of Portland shaped my soul in ways I've only recently begun to understand. Our craftsman-style house, with its deep front porch and moss-softened roof, was a portrait of comfortable, Pacific Northwest living. From the outside, we were the Hayeses. Arthur, a respected architect, Helen, a homemaker with a prize-winning rose garden, and their two daughters. We looked like a page from a lifestyle magazine. But inside those walls, a silent hierarchy was firmly in place. Sophia, 2 years my senior, was born sparkling. With our mother's fiery red hair, a constellation of charming freckles, and a laugh that could coax the sun from behind the perpetual Oregon clouds, she was captivating. Our parents, Arthur and Helen, were her most devoted audience. Their favoritism wasn't malicious, it was more like a natural law of our household, an atmospheric pressure to which we all adapted. Sophia gets her artistic flair from my side of the family, my mother would say, a note of pride in her voice as she watched my sister command attention with a dramatic story or a pirouette in the living room. I, on the other hand, was my father's daughter, quiet, observant, with his thoughtful brown eyes and a serious disposition that often made people uncomfortable. Where Sophia was a burst of color, I was a study in shades of gray. By the age of 10, I had developed a profound fascination with rules, fairness, and logic, perhaps as a way to make sense of a home environment that often felt arbitrary. I'd spend hours in my room creating intricate legal systems for my collection of Breyer horses, holding trials to determine which one had kicked over the water trough. Sophia found it deeply weird. My parents, if they noticed at all, saw it as just another of Clara's quiet, incomprehensible hobbies. "Clara, honey, why don't you try out for the school play like your sister?" my mother would suggest, her voice gentle but the message clear. Be more like Sophia. Be more visible. Family dinners were exercises in my own invisibility. The conversation would swirl around Sophia's latest audition for a local commercial, her burgeoning popularity, her role as the lead in the school musical. My own triumphs, like winning the state-level mock trial competition, were met with a distracted, "That's wonderful, dear," before the spotlight swiveled back to Sophia. "Now, tell us again what the casting director said about your stage presence." This pattern became more pronounced as we grew older. The year I was accepted into a prestigious pre-law summer program at Stanford, my father's primary question was about the cost. That same month, they spent over $2,000 on new headshots for Sophia's acting portfolio, calling it an essential investment in her future. My high school graduation should have been a moment of acknowledgement. I had worked tirelessly to become salutatorian, pouring my soul into a speech about finding one's own path. The morning of the ceremony, I came downstairs in my cap and gown to a flurry of parental excitement. "Sophia just booked a national soda commercial," my mother announced, her eyes shining. "It films in LA next week. We need to help her pack and arrange her flight." I delivered my speech to a crowded auditorium, but my parents' attention was divided, their phones buzzing with updates from Sophia's agent. During the reception, they rushed me through family photos, anxious to get home and celebrate my sister's big break. My academic milestone became a footnote to her burgeoning career. The financial disparities became stark when it came to college. My acceptance to the University of Chicago Law School, a top-tier institution, was met with parental anxiety about tuition. "We've already invested so much in Sophia's move to Los Angeles," my father explained, his gaze averted. "You know how competitive it is out there. You're the practical one, Clara. You'll find a way." And I did. I found a way through a labyrinth of student loans, scholarships, and part-time jobs. I was a research assistant, a barista at a campus coffee shop, a tutor for undergrads. I spent my summers clerking for underfunded legal aid clinics while Sophia, supported by a generous allowance from our parents, navigated the glamorous, precarious world of Hollywood auditions. The calls home became less frequent. The chasm between our lives had grown too wide to bridge with small talk. I had little to say about Sophia's latest red carpet photo, and they seemed to have little interest in the finer points of constitutional law. By the time I graduated magna cum laude, the distance wasn't just geographical, it was emotional, fundamental. They couldn't make it to my graduation ceremony. Sophia had a last-minute callback for a pilot season TV show, and they felt they needed to be in LA to support her. "We're so proud of you, Clara," my father said over the phone, his voice tinny with distance. "You know that." But I didn't. Their actions had never shown it, and the words, offered so late, felt hollow. That was the moment I stopped trying to earn their applause. I decided, with the quiet resolve that had become my defining characteristic, to build a life on my own terms, founded on my own values. I would seek justice, not approval. I had no idea then that our two vastly different worlds, one built on substance and the other on spectacle, were on a collision course, destined to meet in the one place I considered sacred, a court of law. The University of Chicago Law School was as intellectually rigorous as I had hoped, a place where my quiet intensity was seen not as odd, but as an asset. While many of my peers came from legal dynasties, I possessed a different kind of inheritance, a hunger to prove that my worth was not determined by the attention I received, but by the work I produced. After graduating near the top of my class, I made a choice that baffled many of my high-achieving classmates. I turned down lucrative offers from corporate firms in Chicago and New York and returned to Portland, taking a position with the Legal Aid Society of Oregon. "You're doing what?" Sophia had asked during a rare phone call, her voice incredulous. "Clara, with your degree, you could be billing $1,000 an hour. You're choosing to work with vagrants." "Not everyone's life is measured in billable hours, Sophia," I'd replied, knowing the sentiment was as foreign to her as a rainy Portland winter. My small, cluttered office overlooking the Willamette River became my world. I worked punishing hours, fueled by coffee and a deep-seated belief that everyone, regardless of their circumstances, deserved a passionate advocate. My clients were the people society had forgotten, families facing eviction, veterans struggling to get benefits, individuals with mental health issues caught in the bureaucratic churn. Each small victory, a stay of eviction, an approved disability claim, felt more meaningful than any six-figure bonus could have. After 4 years, I made another move that raised eyebrows. I accepted a position as an assistant United States attorney for the District of Oregon. Switching sides, my former boss at Legal Aid had asked, a note of disappointment in his voice. Just seeing the system from another angle, I'd corrected. Justice has to be a two-way street. As a federal prosecutor, I earned a reputation for being meticulous and fair. I pursued justice, not just convictions. I wasn't afraid to recommend lenient sentences when the situation warranted it, nor to drop a case if the evidence felt weak. My integrity became my calling card. While I was building a career on an 80-hour work week, living in a modest one-bedroom apartment in the Pearl District and driving a reliable but aging Subaru, Sophia's life had ascended into a different stratosphere. Through her increasingly polished social media presence and my parents' glowing reports, I learned she had married Julian Reed, a charismatic entrepreneur who had made a fortune with his green tech investment fund, EcoVest Capital. They lived in a sprawling glass house in the Hollywood Hills, vacationed in St. Bart's, and were regulars on the LA charity gala circuit. Sophia had seamlessly transitioned from aspiring actress to full-time socialite and influencer, her life a curated feed of glamour and opulence. At 35, an opportunity arose that I never would have predicted. Judge Garrett, a distinguished and deeply respected federal judge in our district, announced his retirement. Citing my unique background on both sides of the legal aisle and my reputation for fairness, he personally recommended me to the White House as his successor. The nomination and confirmation process was a gauntlet. My entire life was placed under a microscope. My age was a constant point of contention. Some senators suggested I lacked the life experience for a lifetime appointment. But Judge Garrett's endorsement held immense sway, and after months of grueling hearings and interviews, I received the call. I was to be confirmed as the youngest federal judge in the history of the District of Oregon. The swearing-in ceremony took place on a Tuesday afternoon, the Portland sky offering a rare, brilliant blue. The courtroom was filled with colleagues, mentors, and the few close friends I'd made. My parents and sister were conspicuously absent. I had sent them an invitation, of course, but had received a polite, regretful text from my mother. They had a commitment, a fundraiser for one of Julian's environmental charities that they simply couldn't miss. As I placed my hand on the Bible and took the oath of office, a wave of complex emotions washed over me. Immense pride, profound gratitude, and a familiar, lingering ache of sadness that the people who should have been cheering the loudest weren't there to witness it. The first year on the bench was a trial by fire. Some older, more experienced attorneys clearly intended to test the kid judge. They soon learned that my youth was not synonymous with naivete. I was prepared, I knew the law, and I ran my courtroom with a quiet authority that demanded respect. "Judge Hayes doesn't miss a thing," I overheard a lawyer mutter to another in the hallway. That casual comment brought me a deeper satisfaction than any parental praise ever had. My personal life remained a footnote. The demands of the job were all-consuming, and the ethical guardrails of being a federal judge made dating a minefield. The few men I met were either intimidated by my position or disturbingly attracted to it. My apartment remained tastefully but sparsely furnished. I had little time or energy for decorating. Holidays were often spent catching up on reading briefs. It was a solitary life, but a purposeful one. I had made my choice. Meanwhile, Sophia and Julian's star continued to rise. They were featured in Vanity Fair, their home profiled in Architectural Digest. Sophia's Instagram, a testament to conspicuous consumption, showcased a life that seemed to exist in a parallel, gilded universe. None of us, not my starstruck parents, not the fawning media, and certainly not me, realized that the foundation of that glittering life was made of sand, and the tide was about to turn. The first tremors of Sophia's downfall were subtle, reaching me as distant rumbles through my parents' infrequent but telling phone calls. Initially, the news was spun as positive career pivots. Sophia's agency didn't renew her acting contract, my mother mentioned one Sunday, but she says it's for the best. She's focusing on her brand now. Her social media is a full-time job. Did you know she has over 1 million followers? I'd murmur a non-committal response, my mind on a complex racketeering case I was presiding over. It didn't register then that at 38, Sophia was aging out of an industry that worships youth, and influencer was a life raft, not a promotion. A few months later, my father called, his voice booming with pride. Sophia and Julian just bought the most incredible beach house in Santa Barbara. Right on the water, glass walls everywhere. They've invited us for a month this summer. The extravagance felt breathtaking, but I was too immersed in my work to give it much thought. It wasn't until a year later that the updates took on a more troubling tone. My mother called late one evening, her voice uncharacteristically strained. "Your father's blood pressure is high again," she said. "The doctor says he needs to eliminate stress. Is he thinking about retiring for good?" I asked, a pang of concern cutting through my usual detachment. "Well, that's the problem," she hesitated. "We've had to help Sophia and Julian out a bit. We dipped into his retirement account. Just a loan, of course. Julian has a new venture, something about sustainable plastics, and it needs a little more capital to get off the ground. They'll pay us back tenfold." A cold knot of unease formed in my stomach. I knew enough about venture capital to know that successful, legitimate funds don't solicit loans from their in-laws' retirement accounts. Over the next 2 years, the picture grew darker. My parents sold the Laurelhurst home, the house I grew up in, and moved into a small condo in a bland suburban development. They claimed they were downsizing, but I knew it was a foreclosure in disguise. All the while, Sophia's Instagram feed became even more lavish, a desperate performance of wealth that was jarringly at odds with the whispers I was hearing. Through a friend who worked in financial regulation, I learned that Julian Reed's EcoVest Capital was under informal scrutiny. There were rumors of impossibly high returns, of new investor money being used to pay off old investors. It was the classic blueprint of a Ponzi scheme. During a rare visit to Portland, my father, looking frail and years older than his age, confided in me. "We're worried about Sophia," he said, his voice low. "She seems brittle, always performing. And I think she's drinking too much." My mother quickly shushed him, ever the protector of her favored child's image, but the seed of worry had been planted. I tried calling my sister, the first direct call in almost a year. She picked up, her voice thick and slurry despite it being early afternoon. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she purred sarcastically. "If it isn't my little sister, the bookworm. To what do I owe the honor?" "Mom and Dad are worried about you, Sophia," I said, forgoing any pretense. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is fabulous," she snapped, her tone suddenly sharp and defensive. "Julian is a genius, and I'm living the life you can only dream of. Not all of us are content to rot away in the rain, Clara." The call ended there, but 6 months later, her gilded world imploded. Julian Reed was arrested by the FBI. The charges were staggering: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering. EcoVest Capital was, as suspected, a massive Ponzi scheme that had bilked hundreds of investors out of more than $200 million. The media went into a frenzy, splashing photos of their Hollywood Hills mansion, their fleet of luxury cars, and their extravagant vacations across every news outlet. Sophia, once lauded for her glamour, was now cast as the modern-day Marie Antoinette, the greedy, clueless wife of a white-collar criminal. My parents were frantic. "They've frozen all their assets, Clara." My mother wept over the phone. "Sophia has nothing. The prosecutors are saying she might be involved, that she had to have known." I offered what little comfort I could, while maintaining the professional boundary my position demanded. Privately, I feared the worst. Sophia's entire identity was built on that money. Her social media was a meticulously documented timeline of their fraudulent spending. Pleading ignorance would be nearly impossible. Julian was released on a multi-million-dollar bond, confined to their home with an ankle monitor. Sophia, though not yet charged, was named as a person of interest and had her passport confiscated. Their life of limitless travel was over. What followed was a slow-motion car crash of desperation. Sophia tried to maintain appearances, borrowing from friends until her calls went unanswered. She attempted to sell off her collection of designer bags and jewelry, only to have the items seized by federal marshals as assets purchased with the proceeds of crime. When her own resources dried up, she turned on our parents with a terrifying ferocity. A family friend called me, her voice hushed with concern. "Clara, you need to know. She's bled them dry. Your father had to unretire. He's working as a security guard at a mall. Your mother is selling her jewelry, even her wedding band. They're about to lose the condo." The final, pathetic blow came when Sophia was arrested. In a desperate attempt to raise cash, she had been selling high-end counterfeit designer goods online, passing them off as her own authentic collection. This act of small-time fraud, so far beneath her former station, was what finally landed her in handcuffs. As the investigation deepened, it became clear Sophia was more than just a beneficiary. Emails and text messages revealed she had actively wooed potential investors at parties, knowingly used illicit funds for personal expenses, and even helped Julian create offshore accounts to hide money. The golden child, the one who had always been sheltered and adored, was now facing serious federal charges of her own. And by a twist of fate so cruel and perfect it felt like something out of a Greek tragedy, Her case was about to fall under the jurisdiction of the United States District Court for the District of Oregon. My court. The formal indictment against Sophia came down on a Wednesday morning, one count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and one count of money laundering. Because several of the defrauded investors were Oregon residents, jurisdiction was established in my district. Initially, however, the case was not assigned to me. It landed on the docket of Judge William Garrett, my esteemed mentor, who was scheduled to preside over her arraignment. I learned of it from my law clerk, a bright young man named Leo, who mentioned it casually as he handed me my calendar for the week. That influencer fraud case, the Reed Hayes one, is on Judge Garrett's docket for Tuesday, he said, oblivious to the bomb he had just dropped. Should be a media circus. I felt the blood drain from my face. I steadied myself against my desk. Sophia Reed Hayes, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That case is here? Yes, Your Honor. The conspiracy charge links back to some Portland-based investors. Is something wrong? I took a deep, steadying breath, my judicial training kicking in. Leo, Sophia Hayes is my sister. His eyes widened in disbelief. I had no idea. I'm so sorry, Your Honor. There's nothing to be sorry for, I said, already reaching for the phone. But I need to speak with Judge Garrett immediately. Judge Garrett was the soul of discretion and understanding. This is an untenable situation for you, Clara, he said, his voice kind but grave. Even with me presiding, the mere fact of your sister being tried in your courthouse is fraught with perceived conflicts. I understand, Bill, I replied. I will maintain a complete firewall. I won't discuss it, I won't access the files, I won't go anywhere near your courtroom when it's in session. Does she know you're a judge here? He asked. A humorless laugh escaped me. I highly doubt it. She's never shown the slightest interest in my career. To her, I'm still just her boring little sister who lives in Portland. The ethical path was clear. I would recuse myself from any and all matters related to her case. For 5 days, I followed that protocol to the letter. I ate lunch in my chambers and used the private judicial hallways to avoid any chance encounters. I deflected all news-hungry questions from colleagues with a polite but firm, I can't comment on a pending case. Then, the unthinkable happened. On Sunday evening, 2 days before Sophia's scheduled arraignment, Judge Garrett suffered a major stroke. He was rushed to the hospital, and while his prognosis was stable, he was incapacitated for the foreseeable future. The chief judge called an emergency meeting of the district's active judges first thing Monday morning to redistribute Judge Garrett's heavy caseload. As the junior judge, I was expected to take on a significant portion. I can take any of the cases except for United States v. Reed Hayes, I stated immediately. The defendant is my sister. The chief judge, a stern but fair man named Lawrence Shaw, looked at me, startled. You never disclosed this, Judge Hayes. It wasn't relevant as long as Judge Garrett was presiding, I explained. But now I must formally recuse myself. He scowled, tapping a pen on the conference table. This is a problem. The arraignment is tomorrow morning. We are short-staffed with Garrett out. Every other judge is in the middle of a trial. Surely it can be rescheduled, I insisted, my heart pounding. This is a textbook conflict of interest. The defense has already been granted 2 continuances, he countered, his voice firm. The U.S. Attorney's Office is vehemently opposing any further delays. They argue she's using her notoriety to manipulate the system. We went back and forth for an hour. The chief judge consulted the court's ethics council. Finally, he returned with a decision that made my stomach plummet. The consensus is that you can, and perhaps should, preside over the arraignment. It is a procedural hearing, not a determination of guilt. You will set bail conditions and schedule future dates. As long as you disclose the relationship on the record and give the defense the explicit opportunity to demand a different judge, you will have met your ethical obligations. But that means announcing our relationship in open court, I protested. The media will have a field day. Which is the greater harm to the institution, Clara? He asked pointedly. A day of media attention, or the accusation that we delayed justice and gave special treatment to a defendant because she's related to a judge? He was right. The very principles of swift and impartial justice I had sworn to uphold were at stake. My personal agony was secondary. I'll do it, I finally conceded. But I want her attorney informed privately, beforehand. Give them the chance to make the request for recusal without the public spectacle. The chief judge agreed. The plan was set. That night was the longest of my life. I sat in my quiet apartment, the Portland rain streaking down the windows, and rehearsed my lines as if for a play. I reviewed the ethical canons, steeling myself for the inevitable storm. The next morning, I dressed in my black robe with mechanical precision. I arrived at the courthouse before dawn, sealing myself in the sanctuary of my chambers. At 8:30 a.m., my clerk knocked. I spoke with Ms. Hayes's attorney, Mr. Adler, Leo reported. He was shocked. He said he needed to consult with his client. Leo hesitated. And? I prompted. And, Your Honor. Ms. Hayes refused to believe him. She apparently accused him of making it up, called it a bizarre and pathetic tactic, and insisted on proceeding as scheduled. She thinks you're a local magistrate or something. Her words were, I'm not afraid of my nobody sister. I closed my eyes. Of course. In Sophia's universe, my life was so insignificant that the idea of me holding a position of power was literally unbelievable. The attorney apologizes profusely, Leo added. He says she is adamant. Then we proceed as the law requires, I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside. The hearing will commence at 9:30 a.m. sharp. For the next hour, I did something I had sworn I wouldn't. I read the preliminary file on my sister's case. I had to be prepared. The evidence laid out by the prosecution was damning. At 9:25, I stood, straightened my robe, and took a deep breath. My bailiff stood by the door to the courtroom. It's a full house, Your Honor, he said quietly. Press is packed in the back. I nodded. Let's begin. The door opened, and I stepped out onto the dais, into the brightest, harshest spotlight I had ever known, about to face a sister who had no idea that the judge she was about to confront held not only the power of the federal government, but a lifetime of shared history in her hands. All rise. The United States District Court for the District of Oregon is now in session, the Honorable Clara Hayes presiding. The bailiff's voice was a resonant anchor in the sea of tense silence that filled courtroom 9A. The room was, as he'd warned, packed to the gills. The air crackled with the electric anticipation reserved for celebrity trials. I kept my gaze fixed on the American flag behind the witness stand as I walked to the bench, a deliberate performance of judicial composure. Only when I was seated high on the dais did I allow my eyes to sweep the room, my gaze finally landing on the defense table. There she was. Sophia. She was dressed in a severe charcoal gray suit, her fiery hair tamed into a tight, joyless bun. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. She was whispering something to her attorney, a distinguished-looking man named Samuel Adler, whose expensive suit couldn't hide his palpable discomfort. As my name was announced, Sophia looked up. Our eyes met across the cavernous room. I watched the sequence of emotions flicker across her face like a faulty projection. First, mild curiosity, then confusion, which morphed into a kind of comical disbelief, and finally, dawning, unfiltered horror. Her hand, with its perfectly manicured nails, shot out and gripped Mr. Adler's arm. This court is now in session, I announced, my voice steady despite the frantic drumming in my chest. We're here for the arraignment in the case of the United States of America versus Sophia Reed Hayes. Before I could continue, Sophia shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is a joke, right? She demanded, her voice high and piercing, shattering the courtroom's decorum. Is this some kind of sick, twisted prank? Mr. Adler was on his feet beside her, his hand on her arm, whispering urgently. She shook him off. Miss Hayes, I said, my tone as even as I could make it, you will be seated and you will address this court with the respect it is due, or you will be held in contempt. Her face contorted into a mask of pure fury, the one I remembered from childhood when I'd accidentally broken one of her dolls. You? You are the judge? My worthless, invisible little sister is pretending to be a judge. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. The reporters in the back began scribbling furiously. Your Honor, I apologize for my client's outburst, Mr. Adler pleaded, his face flushed with embarrassment. May we have a brief recess too? But Sophia was unstoppable, a runaway train of long-simmering resentment. No, I will not be judged by her. She has been jealous of me her entire life. This is some pathetic revenge fantasy she's cooked up in her sad little life. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp woman named Isabel Rossi, rose. Your Honor, is the defense acknowledging a conflict of interest that this court should address? Sophia didn't let me answer. Her tirade grew more personal, more venomous. Look at her. Sitting up there in that ridiculous black robe, playing make-believe. The plain one, the boring one. The one who never had a date, who spent her life with her nose in a book while I was out actually living. The bailiff started to move toward her, but I held up a hand, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, stopping him. As agonizing as this was, her words were building my case for recusal more effectively than any legal argument could. You are a nobody, Clara, she shrieked, her voice cracking. You always have been and you always will be. This costume doesn't change that. I demand a real judge. The courtroom had fallen into a stunned, breathless silence. The sheer, raw vitriol of the attack seemed to have shocked even the most jaded court watchers. I took a slow, deliberate breath. Miss Hayes, you are correct on one point, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. There is a conflict of interest. A significant one. Which is precisely why this court attempted to have this case reassigned yesterday. It was your own refusal to accept the reality of the situation, when your counsel informed you, that has led to this unfortunate public display. This seemed to confuse her for a second. What are you talking about? He didn't tell me anything about you. Mr. Adler looked miserable. I tried to explain the situation, Sophia, he mumbled. You wouldn't listen. This is insane, she shot back, turning her fury on me again. You expect anyone to believe that my sister, the family charity case, is a federal judge? It's laughable. She's a fraud. At that moment, as if on cue, the side door to the courtroom opened and Chief Judge Lawrence Shaw entered. He had clearly been alerted to the chaos erupting in my courtroom. He walked directly to the side of the bench and leaned up to speak to me, his voice a low murmur, but his presence a powerful statement. Judge Hayes, is there a problem here? He asked, his formal use of my title a clear signal to the entire room. Thank you for your concern, Chief Judge Shaw, I replied, my voice carrying clearly. I believe we were just establishing the grounds for my recusal, based on my familial relationship with the defendant. I watched Sophia's face as she processed the scene, the chief judge of the district, addressing me with deference, calling me Judge Hayes. The color drained from her cheeks. The righteous fury in her eyes guttered and died, replaced by a dawning, sickening understanding. For the first time since I had entered the room, she was silent, sinking slowly back into her chair as the world she thought she knew dissolved around her. Good morning, Chief Judge Shaw, I said, nodding to him, before addressing the court one last time. For the record, I want to state that Judge Clara Hayes is a duly appointed and highly respected member of this bench. Any implication to the contrary is baseless and will be met with the full authority of this court. He then turned to me. Judge Hayes, your recusal is accepted. Thank you, I said, my voice a model of judicial calm. In light of the clear and demonstrated conflict of interest, this court hereby recuses itself from any and all proceedings in this matter. Chief Judge Shaw will reassign this case immediately. I looked toward the bailiff. This court is adjourned. All rise, he called out. I stood, my back ramrod straight, and walked with measured steps back toward the door to my chambers, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on me. I did not look at my sister. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, the facade of strength crumbled. My knees felt weak, and I gripped the edge of my desk for support. My hands were shaking. The scene had played out not as a victory, but as a tragedy. The sister who had spent a lifetime making me feel worthless had just declared it to the world, only to have that world show her, in the most brutal way imaginable, that she was wrong. But there was no triumph in her humiliation. There was only a profound, hollow sadness for the broken thing our family had become. The door to my chambers had barely closed when my phone began vibrating incessantly on the desk. I ignored it, knowing it was the media, circling like sharks smelling blood in the water. I sank into the high-backed leather chair and allowed myself a single, shuddering breath, a moment of release I rarely permitted myself within the courthouse walls. A soft knock came at the door. "Judge Hayes." It was Leo, my clerk, his voice hesitant. "Chief Judge Shaw would like to see you in his chambers when you're ready." "I'll be right there, Leo." "Thank you." I took a moment to smooth my robe and compose my features, reassembling the mask of judicial poise. Chief Judge Shaw's chambers were a sanctuary of order and history, lined with leather-bound books that smelled of old paper and wisdom. "Sit down, Clara," he said, abandoning the formality of our titles. That was an ordeal. "I apologize for the disruption to the court's decorum, Lawrence," I began. He held up a hand. "You have nothing to apologize for. You conducted yourself with grace and professionalism under fire. I'm proud of you. But I'm also concerned for you. That was your family out there." "Yes," I confirmed, the single word feeling heavy with unspoken history. "We have been estranged for a very long time." He nodded, his expression softening with empathy. "Family dynamics are the messiest part of the human condition. Take the rest of the day. The press is swarming. Go home. You've earned the peace and quiet." I didn't argue. He was right. The media was indeed waiting by the judge's private garage exit, a gauntlet of cameras and shouted questions. I kept my head down, offered a firm no comment, and drove away, my quiet life suddenly, glaringly public. Back in the solitude of my apartment, I found over 50 missed calls and a flood of text messages. One stood out. It was from my father. "We saw the news. Are you okay? Can we talk?" It was the first time in my adult life he had initiated a conversation about my well-being. I typed back a simple yes and waited. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. I was surprised to hear both of their voices, tinny and anxious on speakerphone. "Clara," my father began, his voice sounding thin and old. We saw the video." "What Sophia said to you?" His voice cracked. "It was monstrous. We are so sorry." "It's not the first time she said things like that," I replied quietly, the words tasting of old wounds. A heavy silence hung on the line. Then my mother spoke, her voice thick with tears. "We know. I think we've always known how unbalanced things were. How we treated you both. We just didn't want to see it." Her admission was a key turning a lock inside me I hadn't known was rusted shut. Tears I hadn't realized I was holding back began to stream down my face. "Why?" I asked, the simple question containing a lifetime of pain. Was I not good enough? "No, oh no, sweetheart, never," my father said, his voice urgent. "It was the opposite. You were always so capable, so strong. You never seemed to need us. Sophia, she was always so fragile, so demanding. She needed constant reassurance. So I was punished for my strength," I stated, the bitterness of it sharp on my tongue. "We failed you," my mother sobbed. "We failed you both. We gave her everything and taught her nothing about resilience. We gave you nothing and forced you to find it all on your own." Both were a kind of neglect. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest. It was a start. We talked for over an hour, the most truthful conversation we'd ever had. They asked if they could come visit, to really see my life, and for the first time, I felt a genuine desire to say yes. The media frenzy continued for days. "Judge's sister melts down in court," screamed one headline. But the narrative that emerged was largely sympathetic to me. My calm demeanor in the face of such a personal attack had, paradoxically, enhanced my reputation. My colleagues rallied around me. Judge Santiago, who was assigned Sophia's case, stopped by my chambers. "For what it's worth, Clara," he said gently, "her attorney has filed a motion for a full psychiatric evaluation." I think that outburst was a genuine breakdown. I simply nodded, maintaining my professional boundary. A week later, I received a formal request through channels. Sophia wanted to see me. She was being held at the Federal Detention Center pending her evaluation. My first instinct was to refuse. But after consulting with the Ethics Council, who confirmed a personal visit was permissible, I decided to go. The detention center was a world of beige walls and disinfectant. I was led to a small, sterile visitation room. When Sophia was brought in, wearing a standard-issue gray jumpsuit, I was shocked by her appearance. The artifice was gone. Her face was bare, pale, and puffy from crying. We sat in silence for a long moment, the plexiglass between us feeling like a metaphor for our entire lives. "I didn't believe it was you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "When Samuel told me Judge Hayes was my sister, I thought he was lying. It didn't seem possible." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a confusion that seemed genuine. "You're really a federal judge." "How?" "A lot of hard work," I said simply. "Years of it. Nobody ever told me." "Would you have listened if they had?" I asked, not unkindly. She looked down at her hands. "I've lost everything, Clara. Everything. My home, my husband, my friends, my own parents are broke because of me. And then I find out that you, the person I spent my whole life pitying, you're the one who actually made something of yourself." "I can't discuss your case, Sophia," I said gently. "I'm not asking you to," she said, looking up, her eyes pleading. I don't understand how I got here. I was supposed to be the special one." In her raw, broken admission, I saw her clearly for the first time, not as the golden child, but as a woman so terrified of being ordinary that she had built a fantasy life that ultimately consumed her. "Being special isn't about what you have, Sophia," I said. "It's about who you are. It's about integrity." "Easy for you to say from your side of the glass," she said with a flash of her old bitterness. "I've had my own struggles," I countered softly. "They just weren't as loud as yours." As my visiting time ended, she asked the question that hung in the air between us. "Do you hate me?" For what I said. For everything. I considered her question, the real question. "No, Sophia. I don't hate you. I'm not sure I ever knew you well enough to hate you. We were put in a story that wasn't our own, cast in roles from the very beginning." "Can that story be changed?" she asked, her voice small. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe. But we can't start a new chapter until this one is legally closed." Driving away from the detention center, I felt emotionally scoured, but also strangely light. The confrontation hadn't been a victory, but a lancing. It had been painful, but it had let the poison out. The pretense was over. For the first time in our lives, we were both just who we were, stripped of our assigned roles. The following months were a period of quiet reconstruction. My parents visited, and we began the awkward, tender process of building a real relationship. They looked at my life, my orderly chambers, my simple but comfortable apartment, the respect of my colleagues, with new eyes. "We are so proud of you," my father said, and this time, the words landed. Sophia's psychiatric evaluation revealed a severe narcissistic personality disorder, fueled by years of external validation and a lack of any internal sense of self. She ultimately accepted a plea bargain that included a shorter prison sentence in exchange for her full cooperation against Julian and a commitment to intensive therapy. The day she was sentenced, I was in my own courtroom, presiding over a civil rights case. But I felt her presence across the city, a sister finally facing the consequences of a life lived in illusion. Our paths, once so divergent, were now both, in their own way, about the slow, difficult work of rebuilding. The public spectacle was over. The private healing had just begun. 6 months became a year, then 2. Life, as it does, found a new rhythm. Sophia served her 18-month sentence at a low-security federal facility in California. I visited her every few months. The visits, stiff and awkward at first, slowly thawed into something real. "The irony is," she told me once, looking out at the manicured prison lawn, "I spent my whole life competing in a race you weren't even running." "I was running a different race," I said. "A marathon, not a sprint." "And you won," she acknowledged, without a trace of resentment. "I just couldn't see the finish line." Her cooperation with the government and her genuine engagement with therapy had a profound effect. She was a model inmate. Julian, who received a 15-year sentence, divorced her from prison. Another false foundation crumbled away. My parents, humbled by their financial ruin, found a strange sort of grace in their new, simpler life. My father discovered a camaraderie with his fellow night shift workers, and my mother found purpose volunteering at the local library. Our monthly Sunday dinners at my apartment became a cherished ritual, a quiet rebuilding of a family on the solid ground of honesty. On a cool, misty Portland morning nearly 3 years after the courtroom showdown, I drove to the airport to pick up Sophia. She was being released to a halfway house in Portland, a condition of her parole. She emerged from the security gate looking whole. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a calm stillness. Her red hair, no longer professionally colored, showed streaks of silver at the temples. The lines around her eyes were of experience, not anxiety. "You came," she said, her voice quiet. "I said I would." We shared a brief, clumsy hug, the first in over a decade. The drive was filled with the careful conversation of two people learning each other for the first time. Sophia had a job lined up at a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated women find their footing. "It's not exactly the life I pictured," she said with a wry smile, "but for the first time, it feels like my own." In the months that followed, I watched my sister build that new life, one small, authentic brick at a time. She was good at her job. Her own spectacular fall from grace had given her a unique empathy for the women she served. She learned to live on a budget, to find joy in a walk along the river, to define herself not by what she owned, but by what she gave. My own life had blossomed in the quiet spaces that had opened up within me. My relationship with Daniel, a history professor I'd met through a mutual friend, had deepened into a partnership of equals. We were married in a simple ceremony in my parents' rose garden, the one my mother had lovingly replanted at their new, smaller home. Sophia was there, her presence a quiet testament to how far we had come. My work on the bench had changed, too. My experience with my sister had given me a new lens through which to view the defendants who came before me. I saw not just their crimes, but the complex web of privilege, neglect, trauma, and choice that had led them to my courtroom. My sentencing, colleagues told me, became wiser, imbued with a compassion that tempered justice with mercy. On the second anniversary of her release, Sophia and I had dinner at a small restaurant downtown. She had just been promoted to director of her nonprofit. I had just been nominated for a seat on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. "Who would have thought," she said, raising her glass of water. "The golden child and the invisible girl, both finally finding their light." I clinked my glass against hers. "To finding our own light. You know," she said, her expression turning serious, "I've thought a lot about that day in court. When I called you worthless. I know I've apologized in 100 small ways, but I've never said it plainly. I am so sorry, Clara. I was so trapped in my own fear of being worthless that I had to project it onto you. The truth is, you were always the one with true value. Not because you became a judge, but because of your integrity, your quiet strength. I was the one living a worthless life." Tears pricked my eyes. "We both have worth, Sophia. We just had to find our way to it." Later that night, lying next to Daniel, I thought about the strange, painful, and ultimately beautiful journey. The public humiliation that should have destroyed us had, in fact, saved us. The sister who had made me feel invisible now saw me more clearly than anyone. The parents who had overlooked me were now my biggest champions. But the most profound shift was inside me. I no longer needed anyone else's validation to feel my own worth. In the most public way imaginable, my sister had handed me my deepest childhood wound, and in doing so, had given me the opportunity to finally heal it. My value had never been up for debate, even when I thought it was. The courtroom where Sophia had tried to declare me a nobody had become the very stage where I fully claimed my own somebody-ness. Not because of the robe or the title, but because of the woman I had become. That, I have learned, is the truest measure of success, to stand in your own light, with grace, integrity, and a quiet, unshakable knowledge of your own worth. If you have ever felt like the invisible one in your own story, I hope you remember that your value is not a reflection in someone else's eyes, but a fire that burns within you. Sometimes, the greatest victory is not in proving others wrong, but in having the courage to forgive them and, in doing so, setting yourself free.